Rastlos mein Sinn, hilft mein Herz, Geist. Schnell mein Atem, dabei lieg ich dran. Ewig mein Geist, ruhig, Max, ruhig, all mein Denken, es ich doch, keine Gefahren, meine Nerven fluten, Sehnsucht ist's, die mich nicht schlafen lässt, schlaflos hält mein Auge fest. Ruhig, Max, ruhig, ihn an dem Schwinger, der fixe bleibt stehen, umgeben und Sinne umgeben einander, was mich taumeln lässt. Es wandert und wandelt der Fels, langsam, langsam, umkreist er den Stern. Sieh nur, die Erde, die Welt, wie wir.
Hello, and welcome to Now in Zen, the podcast about microtonal and Zen harmonic music, both national and international, foreign and domestic, past, present, and future. For just intonation purists, computer geeks, alternative guitarists, and academic aficionados of all ages, or anybody, from age 8 to 81 over 64. I'm Stephen Weigel, and on today's episode, we are featuring Christian Klinkenberg, who wrote this incredible opera in many different tuning systems, including Bohlen-Pierce, that's called Glacier 2.0. So I guess we'll learn a little bit about the name of that opera. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Everybody said something like the Glacier 2.0, but that would mean that I'm doing the second opera of the Glacier, but it's just the idea that we have something like a new kind of opera. That's the idea. Yeah, that's the 2.0.
So this is a highly experimental work because not only is there a lot of improvisation, but there are also a lot of unique instruments on the stage, right? And electronics are being used. Would you care to explain that to our viewers? Like, what's going on the stage when you see the Glacier?
So, in the Glacier, we use different instruments. Some standard instruments like a bassoon, saxophones, and but there are special instruments. Something like a 41 guitar. So this guitar divides the octave into 41 tones, pitches. Yeah. Then we have also a double bass. That's a standard instrument, but we have also a Bohlen-Pierce bass. That means we have the frets on other places. So that means we have intervals that are almost 146 excerpts.
Yeah.
We have also a keyboard that has been reprogrammed by computer, so I can play on that keyboard myself. Different scales, like Bohlen-Pierce, like 19, like 41. And I can program even the fourth octave of the overtune series. So many possibilities nowadays.
So what was the inspiration for using Bohlen-Pierce 41-tone equal temperament, 19-tone equal temperament? Did you pick those tunings yourself, or did you mostly pick them because of the instruments that were available?
It might be a little bit of both. So we have the possibility here in Europe. There's in Hamburg. They are specialized in the Musikhochschule Hamburg. They are specialized in Bohlen-Pierce. So they have some instruments and some fantastic solo players like Nora Luise Müller.
Yes.
And there is something else. I like Bohlen-Pierce because it's so far away from 12.
Yes.
And that's also a thing I was searching for new things, new possibilities, and that differs radically from 12. And Bohlen-Pierce is one of these. But of course, if I take 41, there are also so many possibilities we can't hear in 12 Edo on the piano or something like that.
Well, are there times when you use 41-tone equal temperament to sound like Bohlen-Pierce? Because Bohlen-Pierce can be viewed as very similar to a subset of 41-tone equal temperament, although I know a lot of people don't do it that way, since 41 is so many notes to have.
Exactly, that's very important. That was also very important for the choice of the instrument. Melle Weiters, he's the guitar player, and he has different guitars. He has 31 guitar. He has a Bohlen-Pierce guitar, but he has also 41 guitar. And as we choose to play with Bohlen-Pierce instruments and other systems together, our choice was the 41, because as you said, Bohlen-Pierce could be seen as a subset of 41.
How do you use different tuning systems, either together or separately, in Opera 2.0 to sort of bring out the characteristics of any given scene? I'm really curious as to how you work in that way.
Yes, first opera I composed in 2016-17. I used only a kind of a 11 limit system, and somebody told me it might be interesting. There are so many different systems. You could use them instead of a leitmotif. So instead of a melody that is related to an actor or to a situation, I could use microtonal system. And I think that works perfectly. Of course, you have to know a little bit about microtonality. Maybe you have to listen a few times to the piece, because people that never heard something like these systems, they might not understand in the first time. So a little bit of preparation might be interesting before listening to the music, but it's always an adventure, of course.
Yes. So would you say that the motifs that you're providing using tuning systems are recognizable? Like, is it a melody that's going to be similar in that same tuning each time it appears? Or not really?
Sometimes that happens also. So that's also a thing I like a lot. Playing a motif, a melodic motif, transformed into another system. That's also interesting. Then we have it in like in Bohlen-Pierce, and some people know that in 19 you can also a nice approximation of Bohlen-Pierce. There's also a nice possibility. So we have kind of an imitation of Bohlen-Pierce in 19. This is also interesting. So I did that a few times in the opera. like the 19 Edo trumpet played by Stefan Althoft. He plays a motif.
Dies ein zu mir, stahlblau das Eis, mein Herz auf Grund, Nachtrein zu mir. Weiß bei dir still das Gesicht, das letzte Bild, erstiegen Zeit,
And then we have the Bohlen-Pierce clarinet repeating the this Bohlen-Pierce motif in Bohlen-Pierce. So it's really interesting. And of course we can create the same thing in 41, like a variation, maybe 41 tone lower, something like that. So there are a lot of possibilities of transforming motifs.
Yes, absolutely. And such a strategy also really brings out the differences between Zen harmonic tunings. And I would argue it also, like, it almost creates kind of like a detuning effect that makes something really, really mysterious and kind of hard to grasp.
Exactly. And also, one thing is important for me. A lot of systems we use are, in fact, approximations. So a transformation of these approximations are also interesting. Like we played in one passage, a septimal blues. And there are so many thirds that are possible, especially in 41, that it's really interesting to play that kind of a groove. And we also try to improvise with the different thirds.
Yeah. It's interesting. On one of our previous episodes where we had Kyle Gann on the show, we discussed how that was a peculiarly sort of American idea, is changing the third and seeing like how many kinds of different thirds there are in a triad, although I would say that's becoming quite popular. You know, I've seen a lot of like septimal blues like on the internet when people just like doodle around with electronics and stuff. So it's really cool that you put it in such a big composition. Well, have you been influenced by jazz at all? Because when I listen to parts of the Glacier, I hear things that almost remind me of Philip Gerschlauer's micro jazz, and some of those kinds of textures with like the walking bass.
physischen Geige, reicht schon mal hinein. Der Gletscher schleift atemlos nicht in den klassischen All. Eine Ewigkeit einmal.
Of course. So I first studied, when I went to the conservatory in Brussels, I first studied jazz. So I did a master in jazz composition, and my teacher studied also with some fantastic jazz musicians like Gil Evans. He was the arranger of some CDs or records of Miles Davis. So I'm also heavily influenced by jazz music, and only after those studies I went to classical music, so contemporary classical music, and then one day my teacher told me, yes, there are also scales that are wider than an octave. The framework doesn't need always to be an octave, and that was for me really interesting. Already in 2005, my first discovery of Bohlen-Pierce, in fact. In jazz music, you have sometimes you work with upper structures, like for big band compositions. So, like you have a triad in the trombones, and then you make a higher triad like D over C in the trumpets. And I thought it might be even interesting to go farther with microtonality. It was always my question: what could I do if I have something new? We have only 7 possibilities, in fact, if we use 12. Otherwise, it becomes atonal. So if we have more possibilities than 12, we can also make more interesting chords in jazz music.
This is definitely one of those opportunities in microtonal music where you can just break open like almost anything you can imagine, and you can sort of gain the ability to become completely unexpected at the cost of having things be very, very complicated and perhaps cumbersome to think of or conceive of as the composer. For your upper jazz structures, are you using consistent structures that you've generated, or how many of them are improvised? It seems like there are some parts of the score where people are playing certain rhythms in time and it doesn't feel improvised, and then at other parts it feels a lot more improvisational.
Yes, it's true. So there's one reason for me to use graphic notation, video graphic notation, and so everything is combined because we have to synchronize everything. There's a singer live and a recorded singer. So everything needs to be synchronized. That's realized by having a video score for everybody in the same tempo. So that allows also a lot of improvisation because we don't have to write rhythms. I write almost no rhythms. I let every rhythm be played by the video score. As the cursor moves from right to left, we have a tempo, and there is a rhythm coming out of this. But of course, it has a much more improvised character than writing down rhythms in a normal, standardized rhythm system notation.
Yeah, so using that kind of score, you really have broken free of a lot of the constraints of our, old European Western notation that's so limited in its approach.
Exactly, that's limited. And I'm always fighting against those limitations. Sometimes I think the music becomes too complicated. Sometimes the composer wants to express something that's really natural, but on the score it becomes complicated. So if I try to use graphic notation...
Yeah. So tell us more about the graphic notation. Where did it come from? Did you create all of the visual notation? Do you consider it visual art? Because it seems like the Well, not only are the graphic scores in Opera 2.0 extremely vivid, but they almost function as, like, you could almost say they're paintings on their own. So, did you make those, or did somebody else? And where did the idea come from initially?
So, in fact, I was teaching in Brussels contemporary music notation. And of course, one subject of contemporary music notation is the graphic notation. So there were a lot of scores by Brown, by Cage, and so I was very influenced. So I thought, okay, they have also microtonal elements. As soon as they start to make a line that goes down or up, we have already some kind of a glissando. That's already microtonal, I think. Yeah. So I started thinking, how can I work with it? But first thing, we started with a painter. His name is Mark Kirsching. He's also a musician himself. So I thought, okay, in his paintings, there's music. There's music in his paintings. Without even the idea, maybe he didn't have the idea to make music with his paintings. But I thought, yes, I can play these pictures. So I asked him, should we do a project together in 2014, 2015? So we did it. He was really interested because he just finished his project and he needed some new material for his next exhibition. So we started doing something like that. I did some research. Where is his material? What is music? Was it music in his material that already exists? And then I researched some Cage and some other composers that worked in that style. And we created a new music language for graphic notation. But these were not yet moving images. They were still images. So, of course, we improvised microtonal music on one picture. Of course, there's a lot of improvisation. So I thought, how can I make a real composition now with that, with opera or something like that? That was the moment when we started using video notation, because then we have his artworks. I do the sketches. He realizes of these sketches a real artwork, and one picture after another is scrolled on the screen of the musicians.
So when the musicians are viewing the score during Opera 2.0 and playing along to it in real time, the audience also gets to see that, right? Because that video score, is that projected on a screen behind the stage in the production? Is that what the musicians are looking at?
That's true. So in some places, the score is also projected on the screen. Sometimes there's also videos of the second singer. So we have, in fact, the story is we have two brothers. They climb a mountain to see the glacier, and what happens? A terrible accident. So, of course, we have two actors, but only one is live and the other one we see as a video. So we have alternating scenes. Sometimes we see the graphic score that has been created to work also as sometimes a support of the atmosphere of the opera. And then we have also the video of the second actor when he has to communicate with his brother.
So that means that the musicians and the singer and everybody, they have to be really prepared to communicate with the virtual singer, since the virtual singer isn't going to be reacting to anything that they're doing.
That's true. So I have to create the score in that way. I have to know, as a composer, so this virtual singer, he can't react to the musicians. So I have to create the composition in a way it still works.
Yeah. It's fascinating how many elements of this work are precise, such as with the virtual singer and the tuning systems used, and imprecise, such as like in the realm of improvisation. So a lot of competing musical forces are being brought together in a satisfying way. So where did you find these musicians?
So all musicians are experts in microtonal music. So to name them, don't hope I will forget some of these musicians. They are all perfect. So let's start. I went to New York in 2017 to meet Johnny Reinhardt because I thought, it's fantastic to have microtonal musicians with an experience since he created his own festival since 1981. So that's a lot of experience.
Yeah, he's amazing.
So Johnny was the first one I asked from United States. He told me he has a friend, Dan Auerbach. He lives in Staten Island, New York, and he plays also microtonal violin. That means we work with cent derivations or deviations like Johnny likes also. And for me that's really important because I can really be precise with the notation and I can really work together with Bohlen-Pierce or with 41. I can really, I don't have to be unprecise like with quarter tone notations or something. Cent notation is really perfect if I use different systems.
So you use cent deviation for all of the music that you gave to the performers in Opera 2.0?
So it is for all standard instruments I used cent deviations. So that means we have bassoon, we have a violin played by Dan Auerbach. Then we have Philipp Gerschlauer playing alto saxophone. He also knows cent deviations really good, so it was perfect. Then we have Luc Marley. He played mostly the baritone saxophone, and he played also a soprano saxophone. The next player on flute was Anne Davids. She plays a lot in Belgium with an ensemble called Sturm und Klang. And she's specialized also in microtonal music. She played alto flute, piccolo flute, and a concert flute. Then we have Nora Luise Müller. She played two instruments. For the first time, that's really the first performance with a contract clarinet. So we have that really bass instruments that's really interesting because of the fat sound. And then we have also the soprano clarinet played by her, alternating. Next thing is percussion. That means we have a jazz drum set together with different percussion instruments. And it's my brother. His name is Stefan Klinkenberg. And he played also the chimes I constructed myself. These are chimes that has been tuned in Bohlen-Pierce. So not to forget Melo Whitehurst on his 41 guitar. Then we have Vedran Mutic. He comes from Slovenia and he played a double bass. In Europe, instead of his double bass in New York, he played a fretted electric bass. Both times together with his own Bohlen-Pierce bass. So that means he uses cordatura and different frets. It's basically a fretless guitar, and he put new frets on this fretless guitar. I played myself a keyboard and I used mostly Scala to retune the scales or the synthesizers. Mostly I used the synthesizers or the VSTI instruments by Applied Acoustics.
Yeah.
I think they are really useful. I think I didn't forget. I named everybody now. Okay, and then we had also
Did you name the singer?
the singer. That's also interesting. We have Jean Bermes. He is a singer. He played two different people. So that was Max and Gabriel. And then we had also an actor. You can't hear him on the recording, but he dances. So it's kind of it's really opera 2.0 because it's not only multimedia, it's also dance. We had an actor, a dancing actor, and his name is Ilan Daniels. And then we have also the conductor, Baruka. And of course, all those other people behind the scenes, like the director, Nicole Erber. She also wrote the libretto. And then we had also people making the sound, making the light, and making the scene, also the costumes, and so many people. I think we were 30 people creating this fantastic project together.
How did this come together? How did this start? And were all the musicians like in New York together, or because I know that there were several premieres and you all traveled around, right? So there was kind of like a Glacier world tour.
Exactly. World tour is a little bit too much. So we had a Belgium tour. We played 5 places in Belgium. That's with all the original musicians. So the musicians that were from the beginning in the project. Of course, then we went a few weeks later to New York City, and we played with Jacob Elkin on trombone, because there were several musicians, they couldn't join us because they had to teach or because they had other projects. So there were part of the musicians also in New York, part of the musicians not.
Were the other musicians that weren't from New York, were they from Belgium?
So in fact, 2 musicians from New York were Johnny Reinhardt and Dan Auerbach. Because
this is such a large-scale project, usually when people are talking about projects in microtonality, it's so individual, or there might only be like 3 people involved at maximum or something, but this is like, on the scale of, any other opera, so it's just really, really exciting to see all this come together.
For me, it's also important to bring microtonality to a larger audience. It's often when we play microtonal compositions that we have like maybe 20 people in the audience. And now I was able to realize a project with like 150 persons in the audience with 7 concerts. And that's really fantastic because there are so many people never heard about microtonality. But now, at least in the region where I live, everybody knows microtonality. Everybody knows 41. Everybody knows Bohlen-Pierce. So that's exciting, isn't it?
That's very exciting. Yeah, good for you. That's great attendance and all that.
I'm in a PhD project since 2014. And since that time, I did like 15 compositions. The first opera, second opera, The Leaf That Hung But Never Grew, string quartet, electronic music. Some of these compositions are more experimental. But I always think it's so much work. Like for this opera, I have to work, or we have to work together, everybody, like 2 years. All this preparation that comes before, because you have to talk much longer before with the venues, with people that might have the possibility to subsidize these projects. You have to ask the musicians way long before, because maybe they have other projects. So I think it's important to bring the compositions to a larger audience. It's also possible because in an opera, microtonality is only one aspect. We have also multimedia, we have video. So maybe people don't know experimental music at all, but they might be attracted by the paintings, or by the dancing, or by the opera thing, or by the acting. I don't know. So, or other people just come for the jazz part. So it is good to have all these different elements to show the audience that microtonality exists.
Heute nehmen die Wissenschaftler an, dass in der Erdmitte eine Temperatur von rund 5000 Grad Celsius herrscht. Manche halten auch das Doppelte für möglich. Genaues weiß man nicht, denn bis zum Erdmittelpunkt in der Tiefe 6370 Kilometer ist noch niemand vorgeschätzt. Die tiefsten Bohrungen erreichen bisher gerade einmal 10 Kilometer und haben damit die Erdkruste allenfalls angepasst. Hauptursache der ist aber der Zerfall der radioaktiven Elemente Uran und Thorium im Gesteinsmantel der Erdkruste.
So what exactly are the performers instructed to do when they are seeing the visual scores? Has everyone talked about it beforehand, and are there instructions for specific visual things? Like, does going up on the painting with the color mean like going up in pitch, or like, is it very free? What's the nature of that improvisation? How specific is it? And how much direction did you give them?
So in fact, video notation is a thing that's really going on already for a few years now. There's also a conference that happens every year. It's called Tenor. It's about different sorts of notation. So I'm not the first one using video notations, but I didn't know when I started video notation that it exists. So I started something, but at the same time there were other people already using something like that. So I created, of course, some of the elements I created myself because I didn't know they already existed. So of course in the beginning I have to explain to everybody how it works. In fact, we have 4 foreground colors. So these are black, red, green and blue. And underneath the painting, the musicians have also traditional 5-line stuff. Some 5-line stuff, because of course we use also tabulatura notation. We also have the special notation for the Bohlen-Pierce clarinet, and Nora uses 6 lines for her notation for the Bohlen-Pierce clarinet.
Oh, the 6-line one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to ask. Yeah, out of all the 8 different ones you could use. Well, that's cool. Yeah, I like the 6-line one too. I think it's the best one.
Yes, that's perfect. Developed by Nora together with György. Yeah. And it was really interesting for me to create a system to make it work also in finale. Because I work in finale since 1992 or something like that. So one of the first versions of finale that makes me using finale since today, because I'm so fast in that program. Sometimes with the students I also use Sibelius, but I don't have the workflow. That's why I tried to work in finale, but it is really complicated because you have to change everything to make it work. So I'm happy that now in that score in finale, I created first the special notation for the Bohlen-Pierce clarinet, second tabulatura notations for Bohlen-Pierce bass, for the 41 guitar. Then of course the scent deviations, I can hear them So everything I write, I'm able to hear in finale while composing. That's really important for me because I'm not only a theoretical composer. I like to listen to the things, to try out combinations of scales. That sometimes that's really hard to calculate because you have also sometimes use something like the fourth octave of the overtone series, and that combined with Bohlen-Pierce or 41, you don't know exactly what's happening. That's why it's nice to be able to hear in finale what's happening.
Yes, because imagining those sounds would be incredibly difficult, even for maybe the best people. So the excerpt we're talking about is the fall today. So what exactly is the fall sort of imitating here?
The fall. I composed, before this composition, I composed The Leaves That Hung But Never Grew. There we had a rising tone in a scene where Anwen was running and running.
Turned to weeks, the weeks turned to months. Every day she swept the floor, she kept the fire alight. She fed the boar each night, every day, 3 times a day. The old woman gave her a plate heaped high with delicious food. And she insisted Anwen cleared the plate before she stood for the first time in her life. Anwen found flesh on her bones instead of just skin. But the strange thing, whenever the daughter of the house asked for another morsel, asked for another mouthful, her mother would pick up a frying pan and fling it at her child. It was hard for Anne when to eat, when the daughter of the house was sitting across the table, watching her, following every forkful.
So I had the idea, I need a falling tone when Gabriel falls down for a long time. And of course, in the first composition, there was just a rising tone. So there was also the idea of a shepherd tone. And the shepherd tone is based on the octave. As everybody knows, Bohlen-Pierce is not based on the octave, but it's based on the tritave. That's why I had to create a new form or a new sort of a shepherd tone. A shepherd tone that's based on the tritave.
Yes. So then, in the score, what happens is you have this cool, like, sort of like blue, like graffiti background with different numbers and sayings, and then the parts that are descending, like in the shepherd tone, they're expressed as these little blue circles.
So we have, of course, there's a text in the opera. In the text, there is always, as I told you, we have two separate characters. It's Max, he's more a scientist, and his brother Gabriel is the one who is enjoying life. And Max is always reading and measuring things, and he's reading about degrees and things like that. And while Gabriel is falling, he is kind of making mathematical calculations. That's the numbers. It has nothing to do with Bohlen-Pierce, but it's the numbers. When he's falling deeper, the number changes, of course.
I see. So it's kind of like a measurement.
Exactly. So, when you go deeper into the earth, it becomes hotter, of course.
Yeah.
And we fall also together with Bohlen-Pierce. And, of course, it's a different thing. We have a Bohlen-Pierce in an electronic way, so it's coming from tape. That's a pre-recorded shepherd tone I created in Bohlen-Pierce. And on the other hand, we have an instrumentation in a stylized version of a shepherd tone, in the way Ligeti did it also for the composition L'escalier du Diable. There's also the idea of a shepherd tone for piano. So I wanted to use the same instrumental idea. So I use just the instruments going down for the falling scene. At the same time, we have the Bohlen-Pierce shepherd tone and playing exactly at the same time as the instruments are falling.
In order to make the shepherd tone, you not only have the instruments playing a descending line and sneaking in one after the other, but you also have like the audio of a Bohlen-Pierce shepherd tone descending as well, like an electronic one. Is that right?
That's true. It starts even before the instrument starts to play.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool, because in the score you have, like, when the blue circles come in that show the descending line, there are other staggered blue circles next to it that are sneaking in.
Exactly. So that, in fact, the instruments can start to play a Bohlen-Pierce scale from top to bottom. But I told them they can start when they want, and they can shorten the scale or make it even longer if they want. So that means we don't have always everybody starting the scale together. Some of the blue points starting later than the others.
I see. Yeah, I kind of heard that in the recording. It sounds like the descending line is being carried by, like, clarinet.
Then we have the Bohlen-Pierce guitar. It's not a Bohlen-Pierce guitar, it's a 41 guitar. Of course, every fifth step is a Bohlen-Pierce step in 41.
Right.
So we have the guitar. We have at the beginning the chimes.
Oh, yeah.
And then we have also the bass in the beginning. Later he starts to play a groove. And what else? I think that's all. Oh yeah, there's one more instrument. That's the Bohlen-Pierce violin. So that means it's an ordinary violin using scordatura and larger grips.
Well, with these instruments descending, there's so much going on with the shepherd tone, but then the other instruments also manage to, like, play this little jazz lick corresponding to the other shapes, and it doesn't seem like the two textures are very polytonal. For some reason, it sounds like they mesh together really well.
Yes, it's in fact, of course, it's a multi-microtonality because I always I use the different microtonal scales, as I told you before, in a programmatic way. That means they have a special character, as already Ivor Direct said in his Xenharmonic Bulletin number 5 in 1975, I think, that different scales have a special character. And I wanted to use that character, but of course it's very subjective, the way I feel the character. I wanted to use it, and I combine it also. So we have different meanings told by microtonal scales. We have the emotions that are transported by Bohlen-Pierce, and I also use at the same time other scales. As you told me, there's a jazzy line, and we have a second time fall that comes later in the end of the piece. There I even add overtone singing, and overtone singing is based, of course, on the harmonic scale. That means I have the harmonic series, and we have also that sound at the same time as the Bohlen-Pierce scale. So that means we have layered microtonalities.
So for the overtone singing, then, you would only be using harmonics, like odd harmonics, with the overtone singers. Is that right?
In fact, he's making just he's making complete overtones. It's just a layering. They're coming together. We have the Bohlen-Pierce descending line. Over that, we have the harmonic scale, and we have two meanings at the same time. For me, the Bohlen-Pierce scale, I used it for everything that has to do with everything that's beyond extraterrestrial, after the dead. That was the idea. And the fourth octave is everything in a philosophical way that has to do with transition. So that means we have the idea of the transition. One of the brothers goes down into another state of life or something like that. That's a transition. At the same time, we have Gabriel, who is already in that beyond scene.
Is that what these words have to do with? Because also in the score, there's like a cool, like, blue rugged background, and then I'm looking at the first fall here, and then when the lines come in for the shepherd tone, when the third one starts, we get these words like ice, state of aggression. No. State of aggregation?
Aggregation.
Oh, aggregation. Okay. A little bit hard to read. So ice, state of aggregation, water, melting point, and these all have to do with Gabriel's scientific mind. Is that right?
Yeah, Mac's scientific mind.
Oh, okay. So they all have to do with Max's scientific mind. And then as more and more words are happening, I guess the jazzlet comes in, and then visually how these are represented are you have sort of three different kinds of symbols where you have a small red square, a small like acute triangle pointing up or down, either in pairs or single, and then you also have these like sort of line symbols that almost looked a little bit like a character.
Yes.
So what are those representing to the performers?
Yes, we have the circles. So as we have always falling circles, that means they have to play the falling line always in the same character. But of course, for the jazzy line, I use geometrical symbols. And for those geometrical symbols, the idea is to have also a different character and sound. Not only in pitch, but every note has to have a different character. It's even clearer when I have other passages in the opera. We have different sounds, and I use different geometric forms. That means every note, there's a triangle, there's a pentagon or something like that. They just have to be inspired by it and to play the sound in a different way.
So it's like, it's symbolic of the fact that the way they play the sound should be fundamentally distinct from the shepherd tone. And they're sort of taking the shapes as they go and using those to inspire their playing.
That's good analysis. I didn't even think about it, but that's the thing I wanted to have. I wanted to have a sound for the Bohlen-Pierce and another sound for the line that's in another tuning. That's true. It's not only the tuning that's different, it's also the way of playing.
Yeah. There are also these green ovals. They start visually low on the score, and then they go up.
Yes, true.
Does that represent going from low to high in pitch, or not necessarily?
Yes, we have, that's also true. That's true. We have the falling, that's the blue one. But at the same time, there is one part of Gabriel who doesn't want to fall, in fact. Of course, you have always, it's also psychological things. And of course, we have also a part of Gabriel who wants to go back to his brother. And it's symbolized by bassoon, violin, and another instrument. I don't know what was the third instrument. Saxophone, alto saxophone. That's true.
Yeah.
And they are forming a chord, so 3 notes in Bohlen-Pierce. They're going up, while other instruments are going down, but it's another rhythm. And of course, you saw also it's visually more. It's starting more transparent, so that means it's softer. When it goes up, it becomes stronger. That's true. So they are making, in fact, a crescendo when going up.
Well, at the conclusion of the first fall, we have the phrase, "Am I dead?" And then I think at the second one, let me see if I can find it. So the second fall doesn't have... The second fall has a brown background instead of a blue background.
Yes. So the background is also we have 7 background colors, and the background colors, so there are 7 colors, and they're based to the 7 basic emotions. We had already basic emotions by the Greeks, like fear, like anger, and things like that. And it was also later researched by psychologist Paul Ekman.
Oh, yeah.
So we have 7 emotions, and of course there's also psychology of colors. And so these 7 emotions, I combined them also to different kinds of microtonality. So everything is connected in the opera. So here we have the brownish color we have in the background. It's connected to the overtone singing, which is based on the scale of the harmonic series.
Yeah, so then you have the other shapes that you have in the first fall part reappear again in the second part, except your red shapes are a little bit different. Instead of having what look like characters, you don't have any of those, and now your triangles are bigger than your squares, and some of them have little handwritten H's next to them. Or maybe those are the characters that you wanted from before. It's a little bit... It's obviously like a variation on a theme. You also have these gray, diagonal, sort of really thick lines running around near the top that are like little parallelograms. And then when you get to the end of the second fall, you have this cool visual where, like, the parallelograms were, like, sitting on a horizontal line, and then when you get to the end of the fall with a big green oval and a big blue bar for the end of the shepherd tone and of the ascending line, the parallelograms kind of like splinter off, almost as if like someone disturbed the line and now it's just like shattered or it's falling.
That's good analysis. So it's a good thing that everybody can see things not only hear in the music but also see it and the graphic score. And that was also the idea. The musicians play the opera for every performance in a different way.
Yeah.
Maybe they find new things the next day because they have new experiences and they see, oh, there's something I didn't remark before, so I will play it differently this time.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's cool. And then in the rest of the score, I mean, we've already talked about the fall a little bit, but I love just looking at the other parts here, because, well, really, I see that, well, all of the score has, all of the parts of the score have backgrounds, and then what sort of look like visual notation, and then sometimes you use that visual notation, I think, maybe to demarcate pitch, and sometimes to just demarcate gesture in general, and so then it's interesting when you have these ending parts that sort of deconstruct into some other large thing, which always makes me think of something like an explosion, although it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Like, in this part here where, well, let's see, I'll say the timestamp, but like at 52 minutes and 2 seconds into the video score, you have this part that says restless ecstasy, restless rustle, my eyes deceive, foggy, my spirit. And this background is all brown. Like, you have, like, brown drums in the background, and then these scrawlings. It almost looks like, something you would see from, like, a cave, like, something that a caveman would do. And then, at the end, these scrawlings just get more and more crazy until, at the end of the page, you just have, like, this big kind of, like, almost like explosion of a drawing. Like, the drawing is getting bigger and bigger.
Yes. So that's the scene. It's called The Nightmare.
Ooh, yes. Do tell.
That's the nightmare in the end, of course. So we have also, as I told you, there's a dancer on the scene. He is also there, of course. And then we have the Max. He's having, in fact, a nightmare. And it's becoming worse and worse. And, of course, everything is exploding in the end. Before he wakes up.
Yes. It's wonderful. So, yeah, and then another explosion-based moment that I see is right before the first fall, actually. You have this score that has much more of an ambiguity of color than in the other sections, where you begin and the background is at first changing quickly from blue to pink, and it says Gabriel, 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 Gabriel.
Gabriel, leise, lach nicht. Leise, mein Kopf zerreißt. Gabriel.
And the text is kind of like fading out, and it's going into the background, and then the background starts, instead of switching between blue and pink in a demarcated way, it starts to become blue and pink together, and then it's almost like red and blue, like seaweed or like smoke, kind of rising out of the ground in like this organic way. And then at the very end, there's a big like black impact with like a little bit of liquid coming out the side.
That's not only for colors. If the emotion is changing, or the message the director wanted to transport, it's not only the color that changes, but also the microtonality, and it can also be combined. Like the colors can be combined. They give a new color. When I combine two scales, microtonal scales or tunings, something new is the result.
When you're working with different tunings at the same time, this is a question I wanted to ask you, because I've been using polysystemic tuning more, and I notice this happens to me all the time, where if I'm improvising in one tuning and then I'm playing with another tuning along to it, either harmonically or melodically, sometimes in an improvisation I'll get to a certain note and then it'll be really dissonant in a way that I didn't expect and I didn't like. So, is there a way that you avoid that in Glacier? Like, do you tastefully choose certain scales to avoid, or have you never run into that problem? Or I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I know that's a tough question.
Yes, of course. It is. It's a little bit like I think when Schoenberg, he had his system to create series, and I'm sure he didn't like sometimes the result. But he had to accept it because it is the mixture. And of course, liking or disliking is something that comes from experience. And sometimes you have just to accept that there is sometimes a result you don't like, or it's not in your aesthetical concept. But it's just the result of a clash of two different things. They are there, and you can't work against it because it's there. It's there. But of course, as a composer, sometimes you have the possibility to adapt things. That's true.
I guess I never thought of Schoenberg like doctoring his own music to change the rules, but I don't know if he ever did that. He probably didn't. Because I know when, like, some composers want to create something with a given aesthetic effect, they'll violate their own rules in those situations, or they throw the rules out and kind of start over.
He had, in the beginning of his compositions, a lot of concepts, but of course, as he's the composer, he's also the master of the music, and he's stronger than the rules he set up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been absolutely great. Is there anything else you want to talk about in the fall?
No, that's good. Yes, I wish you all success and Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year to you too. Have a good one, for sure.
Okay. See you.
All right, great talking. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you want to help us out, please leave our podcast a review on iTunes and spread the word. We release new episodes every month on the 12th, although we haven't been so good about that lately, but we usually try to release at least one episode a month, if not two. Get yourself subscribed so you won't miss any episodes. Now in Zen is available on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, or you can find our RSS feed at nowinzen.libsyn.com. This is a particularly special episode featuring visuals, so our YouTube channel will actually have some sort of new content. So if you get onto YouTube and look at this episode, when we talk about the examples featuring the fall, the nightmare, etc., you can see the visual component. Thanks once again, Christian, for joining us, and thanks to everybody listening. We're here to spread the love of Zen. We now have a Patreon here at Now in Zen. Exciting news. Patreon is a site where you can make a small monthly donation in order to keep our show running. Jacob and I haven't had as much time to work on this as we have needed because of working other jobs. Your generous donations will go towards helping pay our editors, paying the fees to host more episodes online, bringing in special guests, and allowing time for a better quality of content overall. We also have additional conversations and bonus content for our top patrons, although we want to continue to make the majority of our show free and accessible to everybody. Thank you for all you do as listeners and supporters of the show. Catch you next time on Now in Zen.
diesem Augenblick nicht mehr dieselbe des vorigen.
Viele Jahre später bergen die Dorfbewohner die Körper zweier Männer, die sie stark